As Angel sped down the road, navigating by the brief glimpses she could gather between swipes of the seemingly overwhelmed wipers, she fought to apply reason to the experience of the last hour. Nothing made any sense, and she was sure that she was teetering on the brink of a cliff that dropped off into pure and unhindered madness. She wished desperately that she could just see, but the falling rain and the heavy darkness all but completely blinded her course through the woods. She was trying to determine if the trees were moving strangely at the side of the road when the first thing landed on the hood of the car. She screamed as the car swerved on the dangerously slick mud of the back road and forced herself to fight for control of the vehicle as the creature danced over the windshield wipers. In appearance, it resembled a giant spider the size of a cantaloupe, but its 8 skittering legs resembled nothing more than long skeletal human fingers tapping eerily. What would be the thorax was instead a huge gray throbbing organ like a human heart that was topped with enormous insect wings like those of a mosquito. In the center of its legs was a toothy, fanged, round mouth of a lamprey, which to her horror was regurgitating a black fluid onto the glass with each beat of its body. There were numerous thumps as more of the horrid things landed on the car and crawled over the headlights, thereby completely obliterating the little visibility she possessed. In one single horrifying moment, she felt the road descend from beneath the car, and she knew she was flying off and into the incline of the ditch. The airbag deployed as the vehicle slammed into a tree at the bottom of a deep bush-shrouded gully. She was still conscious, listening to the sound of the rain and the rushing stream around her as the engine had died. She tried to move, but her body was racked with pain along her back and right shoulder. She gazed out into the night and waited as she wrestled with her innate urge to let unconsciousness take her. Angel's eyes had almost closed when she heard a ticking noise across the roof of the car. She imagined one of the horrors crawling to her window, but was unprepared for what scurried from the bushes beside the passenger side of the car and climbed back onto the hood. She could barely see it in the shadows through the scattered cracks of the glass windows, but one flash of lightning was all that was required for her wish that she had not. The creature, which had crawled up onto the battered and dented hood of the car, was as large as a medium-sized dog. Its body a shining green exoskeleton like armor, as it slowly stood upright and steadied itself on long, hooked claws. Angel was very familiar with the form which she was looking at. As a child, her foster parents had a fence covered in grapevines that ran the length of their property, and in the summer, it often was swarming with such creatures. This much larger version possessed a grotesquely horrid face which peered at her now with glassy black human eyes like the grisly mask of a human fetus. The fetus/mantis hybrid momentarily stretched the huge opaque wings as it began coming closer to the barrier of the shattered glass which was all that separated them. It began picking at the cracks with its overgrown front claws, hissing hungrily as it reared back and slammed one long hook down with enough force to penetrate and pull out a large chunk of the windshield. Angel watched, paralyzed with terror, as the face looked in through the hole with an expression that was blank and soulless. Then, just as it seemed about to expand the hole and enter the car to tear her to shreds, it was hoisted into the air, snatched from behind by a great black shadow. She heard the thing give a loud, ear-splitting scream as it was broken and crushed before a flash of crimson light signaled its destruction. She sat trembling and waiting when suddenly the door of the car was ripped off with the same ease of force which had taken the mantis. She knew she was screaming, but this realization was made as if she were hearing the sound of her cries from at the end of a tunnel far away. She was aware only that the wolf creature had found her, and after that, all was darkness and silence. Stephen lifted Angel from the car and held her in his arms, listening carefully to her soft breathing and steady heartbeat. She was more or less unharmed, but had passed from consciousness. He had tried to think of some way to calm her before removing her from the vehicle, but the knowledge that the entire woods was now infested with horrid, mutated creatures had forced him to act quickly. Even the trees were now twisting and writhing like massive, tentacle-covered horrors. He was left with the decision of exactly where he was to go. Where was there any haven from the madness that infected and distorted what appeared to be almost every aspect of this world? In the distance he saw a wall of violet light which was dispersing within a mile of where he stood. Deep within the forest near what he guessed was the cemetery, someone was using the power of the skull. Stephen looked down at Angel and then at his own form. By coming here, both he and the wolf had been once more rejoined. However, now there was a harmony between himself and the entity. He wondered if it would even be possible for him to reclaim a human shape now. Resolving to accept whatever fate destiny would choose, he held Angel like a child in his arms and called forth the red flames of energy until they completely encompassed him. Then, setting off like a comet of red, scorching fire, he began a steady run directly through the eel-like moving limbs of the forest trees. The creatures which flew through the air and dropped from the sky would not dare approach the bright tendrils of energy which exuded from his body. In moments, he had found the very path which Andrew had walked to the mansion, and this he followed until he came to the lake. Here, for the first time, he saw the whirling vast vortex, which was the gate through which the dark thing had recently entered. Here was the eye of the unnatural storm which had consumed the small world Angel had created. The forest was bizarre and anthropoid, with undergrowth which was now fungus-like as the ground seemed covered in foul-smelling mold that bubbled and moved of its own accord. He wasted no time pondering the horrors of the gate, and rolled on towards the origin of the light which he had seen. Soon he was leaping the wall into the cemetery, where new nightmares awaited. The graves had been uprooted, and he watched bewildered as the soil writhed with the forms that clawed and fought to reach the surface. Strange hybrid human-insect creatures were swarming from the open holes beside the tombstones as corpses shambled like a mutated army wandering towards the houses at the bottom of the hill. He noticed they were steering clear of one small home by the far road where a familiar glow was issuing from the windows. It was towards that house which he ran, sprinting over grave markers and knocking the animated dead to the side with the shamanic power of the wolf. Dark entities search for those who exhibit certain characteristics and abilities. They will prey upon the weak as beasts will prey upon the sickly and the young to use these unfortunates to further whatever goals and desires the entities suggest. As a word of warning, it must be remembered that the victim will most often be made completely unaware of the horror in which they are enwrapped. So deluded will they be by the powers of the oppressing entities. The process may be averted only in the beginning stages of the seduction, for afterwards the victim will be wholly dependent on the powers of the controlling forces. Chapter 9. The Book of the Skull. Afanasi. Only because of my deep love and respect for you do I feel compelled to offer you some explanation of my actions. The skull is real and asks, no, demands me to commit to a course which would most assuredly ruin me. In the night it has plagued me, my every dream with warnings of a great disaster that will betake our world and torture the innocent if I am not to act upon its command. But Afanasi, please listen and understand that it would be the destruction of all that I have worked for. I grew up in poverty and knew nothing but hunger and misery. For me to throw away my career and works on the behalf of this abominable thing's prophecies would bring only a return to the state of my beginning, and this I cannot do. It has given me the name of an affluent young man who I know to be here in London as we speak. He is a well-known painter and the possessor of talent that most men would kill to acquire. It is common knowledge in our circles that he is a self-proclaimed medium, dabbler in the arcane, and reputed member of the Golden Dawn Society. The skull had forewarned that this young man has been in contact with a group of entities called the Naga, who wish to gain entrance into our world. These entities wish to live amongst us and have offered this man a contract by which he may attain supernatural power and immortality if he will give them welcome into the bodies of his unborn twin children. These beings will exist in an unnatural state which will compromise the balance of their natural lives and give creation to a conditional curse. The skull has proclaimed that these conditions will eventually lead to a horror of undreamt of proportion, and that I am the only one who may stop it. I flatly refused the skull's commands, and in return it warned me that I would not escape this cycle if I let it begin. It claims that it has visited a time in the distant future and knows the fate which will await my soul. It had prophesied that I will be reborn in time to be this disaster's greatest victim, and I will be fated to fall before the horrors at the peak of my work in this sphere. I'm sorry, Afanasi, but I refuse to be a pawn in whatever plot this thing is concocting at my expense. Arkip Zulkin. The final letter of Arkip Zulkin to Afanasi Maskadov. They warned us that this could happen, Sean Levine said to his father in the waiting room of the hospital. Robert stared coldly at his son as Julia wept into his shoulder, knowing what was coming. And we can't just pack him up and take him off to see some charlatan, no matter what you say. But it's his life, Robert growled as he beat his fist down on the arm of the chair. His son had maintained for 6 years that there had been nothing more miraculous about Harris's recovery than a wonderful placebo effect achieved by his grandparents' influence. Robert was disgusted by the smugness of his son was radiating, even knowing that his son was dying. After all, it finally proved him right. But if it would help, then why not try? Julia said through a cloud of disbelief, misery, and tears. Because that witch doctor convinced two elderly people that she healed my son once, and now he's dying again. And they're still sitting in front of me, lost in a false hope that it would work again. Sean's voice was even and patronizing as he repeated the words he had said to his wife over and over since they had seen their son on the news 6 years before. He could not hide the satisfaction he was deriving from finally saying it to their faces. Even Mary was looking off out the window at the city, unable to listen to her husband's sickening speech. Dad, the condition never went away. We've just been really fortunate. We've got to listen to the doctors. They're the ones who are really trying to help, and you're treating them like they're the enemy. I'm just glad Boone and Charlotte aren't here for you to belittle, son. You two would have broken their hearts. Robert's disgust was obvious. No. Don't you bring them into this, Sean said, his patience exhausted. Hurting Mary isn't going to make things better. You can't bring her over to your side, Dad. She agrees with me. That's enough. Mary finally said, her voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. We're not going to talk about this anymore. Robert, if you and Julia can't let this go, then you should just leave until you can. The old man looked at them both with rage and sorrow as his own tears began to well behind his thick, black-rimmed glasses. Without another word, he stood, and taking Julia's hand, they left the waiting room and walked down the hallway to the elevator. As Robert pushed the button for the first floor, he looked at his own sobbing wife. Was I ever that self-righteous and pig-headed? Worse. You should have heard how you sounded when you used to talk to your dad. I just hope he can forgive me then, he replied thoughtfully. Can you forgive Sean for this? She asked, with one of her well-placed introspective questions that made him cringe inside. If Harris dies, I don't know if I can. She looked at him sadly and nodded, her sad agreement. Harris lay in the hospital bed, staring blankly at the TV mounted on the corner of the room, as a very loud pitchman attempted to present a new wonder rag, which could mop up spilled red wine as easily as if it were water. A moment later, an elderly black actor with a famous, soothing voice, so much the opposite of the pitchman it was uncanny, began discussing the nature of black holes. Harris was fascinated by physics, and lay with his stubble of short blonde hair cradled in the pillow as he repeated the words, Event Horizon, over and over in his mind. He imagined a giant spinning blackness in space, and sometimes in his dreams, he floated towards it like on a kite on a string, slowly being reeled in. Physicists said that the event horizon was the point at which the black hole could rip an object or person down to particles, and in theory obliterate said object or person. What happened after that was the subject of a long ongoing debate that seemed more or less a discussion of life after death. Can information be destroyed? For Harris, it was the same as saying, can a living, conscious being just cease to exist? It seemed as if he was close to finding out. It was with these thoughts passing through his mind that he noticed the door of his room opening and a tall female doctor with long black hair entering. She smiled, and he was struck by a peculiarity in her appearance that he could not place. In contrast to the jet blackness of her hair, her skin was as pale as snow, and her eyes a vivid, radiant green that seemed unnatural and enhanced. She approached him and extended a long, thin hand, which he took in his own, if only to validate her reality. "Hello, Harris. My name is Dr. Celeste." Her voice was strange, quiet, and hypnotic as she drew up a chair from the wall and sat down. "You're not one of my doctors," Harris said, his gray eye transfixed by the woman's intriguing mannerisms. She moved with a deliberate, slow grace that was hard not to study intently. "I'll tell you a little secret, Harris. I just stepped in because I was here in the hospital and happened to hear that you were here, and I wanted to meet you." "Why?" he asked, smiling shyly at the personal way she was speaking to him. "Well, I don't want to bother you or anything." You're not. I'm bored out of my mind." She laughed softly. "Good. The reason I'm here is because I thought I recognized you. I've been in the hospital a lot." "No, I mean I recognized you from the internet." Harris immediately felt a sneaking nervousness creep into his previous curiosity about the woman. "Oh, you mean from when I was a kid?" "That's right. You've met Angel Love." "Yeah, sort of, I guess. It was a really long time ago. You couldn't have been more than 10. I was 9. Wow. You don't sound like you really like talking about it." "I don't. You're probably the first person I've met in years that recognized me." "Who recognized you before?" "That year, a bunch of people from my hometown. Eventually we had to move. My parents hated the whole thing. That's how we ended up here in 10 Trees. "I don't want to cause any trouble, Harris. I can leave if you want." Harris's eyes grew urgent as he raised his hand, gesturing for her to sit. No, I really want to talk to someone. I'm really kind of..." He hesitated as he almost said lonely, but instead said, "bored." "Okay, then I'll stay. But we'll just keep this between us then." Harris smiled in relief. "Cool. What do you want to know?" "Well, I'm a doctor, and I've been watching this Angel Love on television and reading about her a lot. And when I saw you, I realized that this was my chance to talk to someone that she was actually supposed to have healed, or whatever. I guess my question is, did she really heal you?" "My grandparents thought so, but I've never really been sure. Something weird happened, and I did get better. But later, when I thought about it, I wondered if it wasn't something else." "Something else like what?" Dr. Celeste was staring at Harris with an intense interest, and Harris found himself enjoying the attention she was giving him. "I remember that when the woman doctor took me, I felt this warm buzzing coming from her body. It was like I was close to something electric, and I began to feel better. I had felt so tired and dizzy, but all of a sudden things were getting clearer, and I was waking up. When Angel Love touched me, it was the same kind of feeling, only stronger. It made me feel so much better than I had ever felt before, and I wanted more of it. I remember seeing her face and thinking she looked scared, but I didn't care. I just wanted to keep feeling better. And it seemed like she was resisting, like she just wanted to give me a little bit, but I just kept taking from her. It was like being starved and getting a taste of your favorite food. And then she fell away, and it was was gone. But you got better, Dr. Celeste said with a calm, serious tone. Yeah, I was better for a long time. But now you're sick again. I'm dying. It sounds like you need to see her again. That's what Grandpa Bob wanted to do, but my parents won't let him. It's so sad, Harris. I'm sorry. I wish there was something I could do. Do you believe in God? I guess so. I don't go to church or anything like that. Can I talk to you in complete confidence, Harris? Sure. I won't tell my parents on you if that's what you mean. That's exactly what I mean. See, I have this friend who's kind of a priest, but of a very old religion, and he knows a lot about the kind of strange things you were just talking about. You mean like a Wiccan or something? A little like that, but the things he does really work. He gave me this little book. She took a small black book with a worn leather cover from her lab coat and placed it on the bed beside Harris. What's that? He asked, picking it up and staring at the blank, worn surface before opening it and leafing through the crumbled brown pages. The words within were in a different language, but comprised of the standard alphabet with small notes made to help the reader in pronunciation. It's a prayer book, Harris. Of very old and powerful prayers. Huh. It's a spell book, right? He said, smiling with excitement as he realized that the text varied in languages. That's right. It's called a grimoire. This one was owned by a man from Sweden who was executed in the 1700s. I like you, Harris, and I want you to have it. But I can't read it. You have access to the internet, right? Yeah. There are thousands of translation websites. You can translate the whole thing yourself, but just remember that you have to say the prayers in their original language for them to work. Yeah, right. You're messing with me now. I would never do that, Harris. But you can do whatever you like. Just hold on to the book, and here. She took a post-it note from the same pocket where she had kept the book, and taking a pen from her breast pocket, wrote something on it before placing it between two pages of the grimoire. Here's my cell number, so that if you ever need to talk, you can call me. Harris stared at the small yellow paper with wonder. Why are you doing all this for me, Doctor? He studied her kind smile and for a moment suspected that she might be one of those older women who preyed on teenage boys. Celeste. Call me Celeste. And know that I'm not trying to sleep with you. He was momentarily aghast that she had guessed his thoughts, and before he could deny his own suspicions, she had stood and was smiling as she gently tapped the book with a long, delicate finger. Give the book a chance and call me sometime to let me know how you're doing. I don't know if I'm going to have enough time left for that, he whispered sadly. Then you will just have to make yourself live long enough to have the time. Turning, she left the room silently, and he was left only with the book and number as evidence that the entire event had not been a dream. His parents entered the room shortly after, and he hid the book beneath his pillow. When they asked him how he was, he replied that he was feeling better, and made no mention of his visit from the lovely doctor. His mother had been crying as his father explained that the doctors at the hospital had found that there was little they could do, and Harris was, in effect, living on borrowed time. Then I just want to go home, he told them calmly and without emotion. A few days later, he got his wish. On the drive home, he stared out the car windows at the dreary overcast day outside as raindrops trickled down the glass, His parents tried to have idle conversation about gas prices and politics, but the reality of his imminent demise hung like the dark clouds in the distant sky over their hearts. He loved them both and found himself feeling worse for them than he did for himself. He wondered how they would ever cope with his death, and his stomach knotted as he envisioned arguments and tears. He had read in the hospital that parents who lose their children often end their marriages in divorce. The thought of the two hapless adults separated filled him with misery. The day before, he had looked at his father and said, "Dad, maybe we should try the angel love thing like Grandpa once." His father had stared at him as if he had been blindsided. "Harris, you're too smart to think like that. I pray every night for a miracle, but that woman is not it. I won't let my only son be used by a con artist freak show host again as a publicity stunt." When Harris got home, he climbed the stairs of their old 2-story house and went to his room, where he sat down at his computer and logged on. He had started taking out the book Celeste had given him when his mother gently knocked on the door and asked him if he was hungry. He replied he wasn't and just wanted to be left alone. He cringed at the hurt he felt emanating from the other side of the door. But after he heard her footsteps plodding down the stairs, he pushed away his guilt and opened the small black tome like a little journal in his hand and studied the handwriting on the first page. He smiled for the first time that day as he read the notes scribbled on the liners and at the bottom of the pages, which to his immense joy gave hints as to the nationalities of the languages and insights into the purpose of the phrases. There was also drawings and diagrams showing everything from objects, plants, and animals to runes and archaic symbols. He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew an unused school notebook and began making notes of his own as he typed in phrases on a translation website. On one page, he found a large drawing of a circle enclosing a 6-pointed star with a heading in Hebrew which read, "The Key of Solomon." He hastily searched the phrase on the internet and found that it was described as a circle of summoning used to protect the conjurer for summoned entities. "I might have to try that," he said to himself, as he glanced at the time on his computer and realized it was well past midnight. Sighing, he stood from his desk and dropped onto his mattress, carefully hiding the book in the bookcase off his headboard between the Prisoner of Azkaban and the Goblet of Fire. He went to sleep that night thinking of what it would be like to really work magic. The following weeks were filled with doctor's appointments and the continuous hovering concerns of his parents, but Harris found himself less involved in the ongoing emotional drama of his health and family, and more concerned with the study of the book, which had become his true work. The doctors had noted a change in his well-being and noted stabilization of his physical state, which they could only comment on as temporary. He knew his parents were refusing to get their hopes up, which he admitted to himself was infuriating. One night, after the third interruption in his research by his worried mother, the thought had occurred to him that maybe they didn't actually want him to get better, and would prefer if he just gave up and died. He had pushed the thought away. But over the next few days, it had become a persistent observance that he was witnessing repeated constantly in his parents' words and actions. His anger towards them grew into a solid resentment, which displayed itself in increasingly frequent snaps and comments he would use to discourage their interruptions to his work. Finally, they had in fact begun to avoid him, and this was when he began to make more headway in his translation. He had come to the conclusion that if the spells he found in the book actually worked, then it was a possibility that he may well be able to save his own life. Unbeknownst to his parents, he had begun the creation of a magic circle beneath the throw rug his mother had ordered online for the wooden floor of his room a year previous. The acquisition of other objects for the ritual he intended to undertake were a more challenging endeavor, as he was not allowed to leave the house without his parents. His solution was to sneak from the house while they were asleep, and on 2 occasions simply occupied by TV shows or internet surfing. He had no money to speak of, and this led to another series of actions involving simple theft. The excitement of what he had undertaken was exhilarating, and he found the feelings of freedom and secrecy to be intoxicating. Walking the streets at all hours with his hood pulled down low like a thief, seeking items to further private magical research evoked a thrill like he had never experienced. He longed to tell someone of his exploits, and this encouraged the first of many phone calls to the doctor who had sent him on his way to an adventure. "Dr. Celeste," he said to the sleepy voice which answered on his cell phone. He realized that possibly she was in another time zone, and the hour would be even later than midnight that he called from. "Harris?" She sounded tired but amused. "Yeah, hey, I'm glad you remember me." "Oh, I couldn't forget you. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm great. I just wanted to thank you for the book and everything." "Of course. I'm glad you like it." "I really do. But I had a question." "Ask away." "Do you really believe that this stuff works?" "Yes, Harris. I really do. I'm just asking because I think I found something that might help me. And I just can't help but wonder if I would be crazy to try it." "Well, your parents thought it was crazy for your grandparents to take you to Angel Love, right?" "Yeah, but it worked, didn't it?" "Yeah. Don't you think if even there's a chance that something might help, that you should try it?" "That really makes sense. Look, you go ahead and try out whatever you're thinking about and call me to let me know what happens, okay?" "I will." "Good. You can call me anytime. I'm dying to know how it works out." Harris ended the call and sat on his bed smiling as he studied the white circle and the star he had carefully drawn, complete with the protective names of angels written along the borders, positioned in alignment with the 4 directions of the compass. 6 white candles sat on the 6 corners of the star, which he lit carefully after seating himself in the center. The book had called for him to wear robes of white, black, or gray, depending on the intent of the magic being cast. However, he substituted a new gray hooded coat for the robe as he began reading out loud the incantation from the book. Placed before him was a metal bowl stolen from the camping supply section of a local hardware store. The bowl, filled with holy water taken from the blessing pedestal at a nearby Catholic church, sat on a chemistry tripod over a burning red candle. Into the water he dropped 4 items representing the 4 entities he wished to contact. A note on the lining of the book had suggested that the summoner call for 4, since attracting the attention of any would be difficult. First, he dropped in a live and thrashing fly that floated, drowning in the bubbling water. Next, a snail, which sank to the bottom. After that, a tiny centipede. And lastly, a piece of molded bread, which the fly attempted to use as a life raft. Calling the names of the entities, he added a pinch of salt for purity and 3 drops of mercury, which he had acquired from an old thermometer. Leaning his hooded face over the bowl, he inhaled deeply and once more called the names of the entities. The vapor from the bowl sent his head reeling as the room spun with dizzying speed around him. The flames of the candles seemed to be giving off a light that was almost luminescent as the hues of their flames began to radiate with glowing orange, blue, yellow, and one which seemed to burn gray as smoke. The room outside the circle had grown pitch black with impenetrable darkness, and Harris's heart was beating at a frightening rate as he watched and waited. All was silent as the flames died down to pinpoints, and he stared, trembling with excitement, as he saw the first movements in the darkness around him. He licked sweat from his upper lip and watched as a shape, vague and undefined, began to solidify in the dim light, and then began moving and crawling around the circle. Cold fear swept over him as his eyes brought the form of a giant fly into focus, its multifaceted eyes reflecting flickers of the candles as it stalked in the darkness. He was able to move his gaze only when he noticed the gleam to his other side and saw that a long, shining body of glimmering black pulsated at his right, an enormous leech that ran the length of his bed. Behind these two beings, the walls and the floors of the room throbbed hideously with a covering blanket of greenish-blue colored mold on which scurried a 3-foot-long centipede with gleaming black-orange armor. Frozen with terror, he watched as his room seemed to convulse with movement. It was then, as he felt himself plunging into madness, that voices, like alien whispers, began within his mind. He fought the urge to scream as he heard one phrase repeated over and over inside the confines of his own brain. What do you wish? The chorus continued to grow louder until he thought his eyes would burst from the pressure building in his head. And only when he had thought for certain that he would go insane did he finally scream, "I want to live!" And then there was only silence. He awoke, curled on the floor within the circle. Candles melted to stubs, and the bowl knocked on its side at his feet. The sun was shining outside his drawn curtains, and he found the grimoire clutched in his hand. He rose slowly and looked around his room to find it exactly as it was. Downstairs he could hear the television and the distant conversation of his parents below in the kitchen. Dazed and shaking, he forced himself to begin hiding the items of the ritual and covering the circle again with the rug. He removed the hoodie and carefully walked from his room and on down the stairs with relief that last night's mercury-induced hallucination was over. "All the bread's gone bad," his father was saying as he stared disgusted into a bag of Wonder White. "Centipedes? And the bread?" his mother responded with disbelief. She saw Harris and turned to him smiling nervously. "Huh, we've never even had a cricket, and now the cupboards are crawling with centipedes. Hey, sweetie, you feel like some breakfast?" He answered no and headed for the bathroom. As he stood preparing to relieve himself, he glanced over at the shower and fell back before he could even unzip his pants. It was filled with brown, slime-covered bodies of 3 dozen slugs. That morning, his father busied himself with trying to find an affordable exterminator. To his mother's frustration, however, he reported to Mary angrily that all those in the area had been swamped with calls from hundreds of people in the city complaining of various bizarre infestations that had generated seemingly overnight. Harris had retreated to his room where, locking the doors, he called Dr. Celeste. She answered immediately. "So, how did it go?" Her voice on the phone was cheerful and soothing. Something happened, Celeste. I think it was real." "Of course it was real. I'm really scared. It was like a nightmare, and now all kinds of weird things are happening." "Calm down. Real magic can be scary, but you can't let it intimidate you. Remember, you are the one who is in control." "I don't feel in control. I feel like I'm going crazy." "Well, you're not. It takes some time for your mind to start adjusting to a new reality. You've just now started to see things as they really are, and it takes some getting used to. But you've got to trust me when I say that it leads to bigger and better things. You have power now, Harris. You have the power to control your own life like you've never had before. Just relax. Give it a few days. Go out into the sun. Walk around. Get some perspective. And you'll start to feel better. I promise." "Yeah, you're right. I'm just kind of freaking out." "That's to be expected. Just go have some fun and talk to your friends. Hey, I've got to go. But call me again soon, okay?" I will. Thanks." The conversation ended, and Harris slipped the phone into his pocket as he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Downstairs, he passed his parents as they argued in the living room and was almost out the front door before they noticed. Harris! Where are you going? His mother said as she turned from Sean, who was apparently on hold with an exterminator. Oh, out? Out where? You know it's dangerous for you to be out alone. She stepped towards him, and with motherly worry written deep in her expression. Mom, I just want to go for a walk by myself. I've got my phone. I'll be all right. You guys just relax. Try to get the bugs out. Just let him go, Sean said sullenly. Harris could almost hear his thoughts. He might as well enjoy life while he can. His mother crossed the room and embraced him, her curly blonde hair tickling his cheek as she held him so tightly he feared she might not let go. Just be careful, all right? I will, Mom. You guys need to stop arguing and have a drink or something. Gently pushing her back, he walked out into the warm morning sunlight. He knew she was still watching him from the doorway and raised a hand to wave as he stepped onto the sidewalk and journeyed alone down the street. Celeste had been right. He did feel better as he made his way past the houses, watching his breath depart his lips in the cold morning air, even though the sun was bright in the sky. He'd originally not had any destination in mind, but found his course leading to the park. Anybody he knew would presumably be in school, so he did not expect to see anyone familiar. He was almost relieved to find the park empty and crossed the grass to the swings where he sat slowly rocking back and forth. He could not deny that he did, in fact, feel better. His breathing was not strained, and the ever-present dizzy lightheadedness was almost completely absent. His chest was not tight, and the frightening sharp pain near his shoulder was gone for the first time in months. He began to wonder if maybe he had gotten his wish. In the distance, he heard a roll of thunder and shook his head with disappointment, realizing that the lovely morning would soon once more be buried in dark gray clouds, shadowing the city in gloom. Shaking his head, he stood and began walking towards one of the hiking trails and ran through the woods and around the length of the park. He would at least get a decent walk before the inevitable rain began pouring through the trees. He felt like jogging, but knew the idea was foolish and risky. The ground of the path was covered in leaves flattened to the earth by the winter snow, and spring had not yet initiated the greening of the undergrowth. The woods appeared lifeless and exhausted as he trudged further down the hill, absorbing the grayness and increasing cold with a glib calm he could not explain. It was as he crossed the small wooden walk bridge that lay across the trickling stone-filled stream that he first heard the rustling of the bushes behind him. He froze and stared in the direction from whence it had come, trying to see the cause, but none was to be seen. Rushing forward, he continued walking, now acutely aware that there were sounds in the bushes to the side of the path, and once he was sure he saw a movement. Rain had begun falling in a dismal mist through the expanse of the woods, and he was almost jogging now, despite his earlier misgivings, as he envisioned a giant centipede scurrying along beside him in the forest like a small dog. He finally came to the graffiti-covered rock wall that stood to the side of the path, where he took shelter in a small enclave in the rocks. It was pouring now, and he could see little more than a few yards from where he stood. His hands were shaking violently in his coat pockets as he watched the mist clouds of his breath puff from his mouth in erratic bursts. His heart was pounding steadily and strong with fear as he glanced up the rock above his head. His eyes widened as he saw lichen begin growing across the stone at a speed beyond anything even resembling natural. Following the growth were ants, which swarmed from the cracks as if a vast reservoir of their insect numbers had broken and their armies were flooding around him. He fell back and stumbled into the rain and watched as the rock face became covered in moss and bugs. Scrambling to his feet, he began running in terror through the woods, panting hysterically as he whispered in half breaths, "I only called 4! I only called 4!" When Harris opened the door and entered, his parents were waiting. His father stood, phone in hand, just as he had when Harris had left, on hold, but this time with the police. His mother grabbed him and studied him with tear-filled eyes as he slumped into her arms. "Oh my God, Harris, where have you been?" I got caught in the rain." "Jesus, Sean, he's burning up with fever. Call an ambulance." Sean put the phone down as he cautiously felt Harris's head. Oh, he is pretty hot. He opened Harris's coat and pulled it down to see the digital monitor strapped around Harris's arm. He pushed the history button and examined the readouts carefully. Shaking his head, he looked at his wife and stated, "He may be sick, but everything else checks out good. Have you been running, Harris?" he said, his eyeing the pulse log. "Yeah, I was at the park when the rain started." "Harris, are you crazy?" His mother was holding his head so that she was looking directly into his tired gray eyes. I feel really good," he said, smiling weakly. "Come on, let's get him to bed," Sean said, running his hand through his graying brown hair. "Hey, is there anything to eat?" Harris asked, rubbing his stomach. "I'm really hungry. I'd love some hot dogs." Sean laughed as Mary broke into a smile. "You're going to be the death of me," Mary said before her face shadowed with guilt. The word death was taboo in their house. Taking her son by the arm, she led him to the bathroom, where she began removing his soaked clothing. Harris gazed at the shower and smiled as he saw the slimy brown intruders within. "Oh, Slug's still here, huh?" He laughed strangely as she wrapped him in a blanket and took him into the kitchen. "Yes, every exterminator in the city is on call tonight. There's been some kind of early spring in the bug world. Someone on the local news said something about a magnetic pole alignment, but it sounds like hooey to me." She set him down at the kitchen table and rummaged in the fridge until she withdrew a package of Ballfield Franks. "How many do you want, dear?" "All of them," he answered. She shrugged her shoulders and placed 8 on a plate in the microwave. As they warmed, she tossed a bag of hot dog buns on the table with the bottles of ketchup and mustard. The microwave beeped and she carefully placed the plate before Harris as he began filling the buns with his shaking, hungry hands. She watched amazed as he devoured 30 without even looking up. It was then her gaze traveled to the bag of buns, and she erupted bolt upright from the chair. "No! Harris! The mold!" He stopped eating for a second and parted the bun he held in his hand and giggled when he saw the entire length covered in green, furry mold. She watched with disbelief as he refolded the sandwich and stuffed it into his mouth without a second thought. "Oh, you need to go to bed, honey," she said, her face pale with concern. "Yeah, I'm really tired," he replied as he stood and began shuffling towards the stairs. "Do you need any help?" his father asked, appearing in the doorway. "No, I'm fine, really," Harris answered with a smile. They watched as he climbed the steps, and Sean looked at Mary calmly as he leaned forward and kissed her cheek. I think he's probably just caught a cold or something." "Sean, he's delirious. He just ate half a bag of moldy bread." Sean glanced at the table and then examined the bag with scientific caution. "We'll take him to the doctor first thing tomorrow." Neither parent knew that Harris was upstairs as they spoke, already calling a physician far away. "I'm feeling so much better, Celeste," Harris said as he barely managed to contain another round of bizarre giggles. "I told you, a walk would work wonders," the woman's soft voice replied through the phone. "I was scared at first, and I started running down the path in the rain, and then I saw this bridge tunnel and ran underneath it to get out of the rain and to escape all the bugs." "The bugs?" she questioned, sounding amused and sleepy. "There were thousands of them, and I knew they were coming for me." His voice was now distant and reminiscent, as if recalling a dream. "I thought they wanted to hurt me, but when I ran into the darkness underneath the bridge, everything became a lot clearer." Harris was watching as a line of ants walked up the back of his hand and scurried over the large centipede which was perched there. "What happened under the bridge, Harris?" "I fell in. You fell into what? I fell into the darkness and sank into it. It took me a few minutes, but I realized soon that I could swim through it like water. That's amazing. What did you do next? I just wanted to get home. And that's when I saw the light shining above me, and I swam towards it, and then climbed out of a hole. It's so funny because when I got out, I was in the front yard. I had climbed out of the shadow of the maple tree by the sidewalk. It only took me a minute to get there from the park. And the best thing is, Celeste, that I think I can go anywhere. But I've got a problem. What's that, Harris? I'm so hungry. And I need to find those people, like there was at that clinic in Colorado. I need to find warm people that buzz like electricity. But I don't know where they are. I think I can help you, Harris. I have a list of names and addresses right here. Now, if I give it to you, you must promise not to hurt them. Her voice was light and mocking, as if she were making a funny joke. I won't, but I have to find them. It's really important. I know it is, dear. I'm going to email you this list, and you do what you need to do to feel better, okay? Thank you so much, Celeste. I think I'm going to get better now. I know you are, dear. I know you are. The next morning, Mary had arisen, and after starting coffee in the kitchen, went to ask Harris if he felt like eating any breakfast. She found his room empty with no clue as to where his son had gone. She would never see him again. He would be registered as a missing person, but he would never be found. His police file would formally list him as a suspected runaway, despite the fact that technically the boy was not expected to live beyond the end of the year. His picture was shown on the local news a week later as his parents pleaded for anyone with knowledge of his whereabouts to please call them immediately. However, the next person to actually see Harris living would be Angel Love, a month later, after 3 of her close friends had already died under bizarre and mysterious circumstances. She had hid herself away, as was her habit when plagued by worry and sorrow. The huge room that served her sole living quarters was locked from the inside. The pool was surrounded by lit candles, which beside the roaring fire in the hearth served as the only light source. The dining table was covered in a virtual buffet of various takeout foods and table wines that would sustain her indefinitely as she did little else but swim, drink, and paint. The pool would become a makeshift sensory deprivation tank as she floated endlessly for hours, lost in a deep meditation from which none would dare disturb her until she herself emerged. Angelica was empress in her home, and few argued her terms, as no other empire could advertise such a beneficial governing policy. From the outside, Angel's world seemed a tightly constructed corporate con, but from within, the unrelenting generosity and sense of community offered to the self-titled guild could not be criticized. In return, Angel required only unabashed loyalty and devotion to her cause, which was little else than the wholesale spiritual awakening of the entire planet. She had been there floating on her back naked in the warm waters of the pool when suddenly a disturbing sensation began to pour like poison into her mind. Her attempts to ignore the nagging fear appeared somewhat successful until the dragonfly buzzed from the darkness and landed upon one of her exposed breasts as if it were an island in the sea. A short cry left her lips as she suddenly thrashed upright and stared in shock around her. The air above the pool was filled with thousands of flying insects of a variety too vast to count. They circled in the light of the candles in a cloud like none she had ever seen, and in the glow of the lights at the bottom of the pool she could see the surface was covered in hordes of water bugs and mosquito larvae, which paddled and squirmed in amazing chaotic patterns around her. Her first initial urge to scream was repressed with awed horror as she gazed at the far wall and saw a point in the darkness, which was growing blacker and more impenetrably absent of light than all other space in the room. It was from that distant void that a shape had begun to appear, as if stepping from the clouding smoke of an inferno. The figure approached and stood, vague and indiscernible in the darkness and the buzzing swarm of insects. She knew that she was looking at the being that was responsible for what she now knew to be the murders of her friends. As it stood at the edge of the pool, a carpet of moss and mold grew out from where its booted feet stepped, and grew out to cover the entire surface of the floor and room. "Who are you?" The words were shaking and afraid as she spoke them. Dark lichen growing around her along the inside of the pool beneath the water, she heard a rasping giggle escape the thin, cracked lips of the lower part of the being's corpse, pale face, which was all she could see beneath the hood of its coat. "I am the Shadow Walker, Miss Love. I don't think we've been formally introduced, even though I have met a few of your friends." The voice was clear and young. "What do you want?" she said, her voice now taking on a cold edge as hatred overran her terror. "I just wanted to meet you. I'm one of your biggest fans. You've helped so many people to live, and that's all I want, Miss Love, to live. But for me to live, I need people like you and your friends. You're all so very special, like warm little lights glowing in the darkness. And I can't help but want to come closer and warm myself. I'm so very cold and hungry. I know that I'm stealing, that I am a thief. But survival is a great and terrible motivator, Miss Love. Don't worry, though. I'm not going to hurt you. Not yet. I just had to see you, to be close to you. I will go, but I will return. I don't think I can stay away from you for so long." Angel watched with horrified fascination as the insects and mold began to withdraw like the waters of a receding tide into the void behind the Shadow Walker. It turned slowly, and in silence entered the darkness, and was gone. She swam to the edge of the pool and, shaking, pulled herself up from the water, reaching to the floor to reclaim her robe. As she rushed to pull it on, she froze, startled as she realized yet another intruder had invaded her sanctuary. The spirit of an ancient Korean man in a business suit. "Not you again," she whispered as she tied the robe. "Will you consider finding my grandson now?" the spirit said with a slight smile.